We're live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Self Publishing Insiders. I'm Jim Azevedo, and I have the good fortune of running marketing and corporate communications here at Draft Digital. And I have the extreme good fortune to welcome our friend and industry luminary and colleague, colleague to all things indie publishing, Matty Dalrymple. Welcome, Matty.
Thank you, Jim. It's very lovely to be here.
Well, it's lovely to have you and to have you back. For those of you who haven't had the privilege of meeting Maddie yet, let me just do a quick run through her bio before we jump into today's topic, which is going to be everything you ever wanted to know about public speaking for authors. So, Maddie is an author of several books, but let me just go through her bio here. Matty Dalrymple is the author of the Ann Kinnear suspense novels and suspense shorts and the Lizzie Ballard thrillers. She is a member of International Thriller Writers and Sisters in Crime. Maddie also, as you may well be aware, everybody, she also podcasts. She's a writer, she's a speaker, a consultant on the writing craft and the publishing voyage as the Indy Author. And I will share Maddie's website here in just a moment. She's written multiple books on the business of short fiction, podcasting for authors, and now this latest book on how to succeed as an author speaker. Her articles have also appeared in Writer's Digest magazine. Also, quite importantly, Maddie serves as the campaigns manager for the Alliance of Independent Authors. Once again, welcome, Maddie. We're happy to have you here.
Thank you.
So today we're going to talk a bit about Maddie's latest book that she co-authored with Michael Laron, or ML Ron, which is called From Page to Platform, How to Succeed as an Author Speaker. I would bet that just the sheer mention of public speaking, Maddie, can kind of send shivers up and down the spines of authors out there because, we're all introverts. And that thought can bring back memories of grade school, high school, college, and just the
Speech
thought of getting up
class.
in front of people, speech class, of course. Um, it can send shivers up and down our spines. So, why do you believe that public speaking can be such an important differentiator for authors out there?
Well, I think any opportunity where you have a chance to get up in front of people virtually or in person, just as we're
Hmm.
doing here, is a great way to form connections with people, to build relationships with people. I think that uh, people in the audience can get a sense of me in our conversation, can get a sense of you in our conversation that they wouldn't get just by uh, going to a website or reading our bio or something like that. You can have a conversation at some level, and you can also reach people with information that it's hard to get other ways, and you can understand their responses in ways that you can't really get if you're just sending a book out into the world and relying on reader reviews, for example, for input. So it's just another way to connect with people, another way to get word out about our work, and then can maybe come along with other benefits like even income earning or travel or a whole host of other goals that people can pursue through an author speaker career.
Yeah, it's amazing the opportunities that can open up for you once you agree to do some public speaking. I've mentioned several times on our podcast now that when I started at Smashwords, and at the time that I started back in 2011, Mark Coker was handling everything or almost everything at the company. He was stretched really thin. He was definitely handling all of the public speaking, all the conferences. So when he asked me to kind of join in and help him out with that, like I wanted to say no so bad, but I really did, if I'm being honest. But I said yes, and it forced me to really, really, button down and dive into the research in the publishing industry because I was coming out of the tech industry here in the Silicon Valley. And you want to talk about imposter syndrome? I had it, and I had it bad because I felt like every time I walked into a room at a writers conference, I was the dumbest guy in the room because here were these agents, and here are these editors, and here are these authors, and everybody had been around much longer than I had. So it was terrifying, but it would have been terrifying anyway if I had already been experienced. But with the opportunity part of it, once you start speaking, even a single time, it's like it just kind of opens up these doors for you. All of a sudden, you're getting invited back to that particular conference or to another conference. And in my case, it opened up opportunities to, since it was the early days of self publishing, it opened up opportunities to travel around the country and even outside of the country. All expenses paid. Like, hey, do you want to come to Milan, Italy? We'll pay your flight and a hotel. I'm like, okay.
That's a pretty
I
easy
have
yes.
to. Yeah. And then opportunities to travel to Australia and New Zealand just for saying yes. And then pushing yourself. And I think pushing yourself and taking yourself outside of your comfort zone is is really important. It's just an important life lesson, generally speaking. But when it comes to public speaking, I think even more so. Um, which leads me into the next question that I have for you,
Oh,
Maddie.
but can I just
Oh, please.
jump off that for a second, because
Yeah.
you said a couple of really important things, like the fact that you went to these conferences and you felt like the dumbest person in the room because there were like agents and editors and things like that. But what you didn't mention is that there were probably a whole bunch of authors who were working on their first book in that room. There are probably a whole bunch of
Oh, sure.
people in that room that didn't know anything about independent publishing or what Smashwords or Draft to Digital had to offer. Like,
You're right.
you have to frame yourself up as you're there for a reason. You're there because, I mean, if nothing else, you're there because you knew Smashwords or you knew Draft to Digital. And
Correct.
so it's easy to hone in on the things that, yeah, there's somebody in the room who knows more about some particular topic than you do. Sure, that's always going to be the case. But that idea that that you're there for a reason, and even if it's something like you're at a presentation to give an overview of your own experience with independently publishing a
Hmm.
book, like, you know more about that than anybody else in the room because you're the only person who's done it. So framing it that way can make it a little easier, a little less intimidating.
Yes. And you just reminded me of something. Like one of the best pieces of advice I've received, and you touched upon it here, but it was put to me a different way. And that is when you approach a speaking opportunity, realize that it's not about you. If you can take yourself out of that equation and look at and think about your audience. It's not about me, it's about my audience. It's about this information that I'm going to impart to them about things that they need to know. That alone took so much pressure off my shoulders. Like, oh yeah, because I enjoy that part of it. I love providing expertise or advice or just education about how to do this thing we call indie publishing.
Yeah, I think that for people who maybe have that kind of service mindset that you obviously do, that is a great suggestion for how can you frame this up in a way that's going to be comfortable for you, be compatible with how you approach these kinds of things.
Yeah. Backstage before we started our talk, I was telling Maddie that, and this is for all of you as well, that this is a very, very thorough book. It's one of those books that if you've never done any public speaking before and you're wondering, gosh, I wish I had some kind of a book. I just don't know what I don't know. Then I can say with complete confidence that this is the book for you. It's very comprehensive, even for those of you who've been around the conference, the conference scene for years, because it'll serve as a reaffirmation for some of the things you don't know, and probably teach you a new thing or two. One of the key points that jumped out at me right in the beginning, right in the intro, was that you talked about how authors have an advantage over other public speakers. Do you remember that part, Maddie? What I'm getting at? You mentioned the authors seem to have like a built-in advantage as public speakers. Why is that?
Well, I think one of them is definitely storytelling.
Yes.
Whether regardless of what kind of book we're writing, whether it's fiction or nonfiction or memoir,
Hmm.
what have you, I think we've all been schooled in the fact that telling stories is a very important part of that. And I think it's even more important now. The whole idea of wrestling with how and if we're going to use AI in our work, and despite all the incredible advances AI has had, it's still not a storyteller. It's not a good storyteller, and it's certainly not good at telling our own stories. And so, in all of those ways, the fact that we're schooled in telling stories, and that stories is a key part of any presentation, just as it's a key part of any book, I think puts writers in a good position when it comes to becoming an author speaker.
You're right. And to put a cap on that, hi, Michael. Author
Yes,
equals
Michael, the
authority.
co-author of From Page to Platform. I saw he had joined us and was adding some comments, so that's super fun.
Excellent timing. Excellent timing. Thanks for joining, Michael. And just another quick comment real quick from our friend Beth Cox. When I talk about backstage, it is a real place, Beth. Here's a question. I can't remember if I saw it in the book, but I'm dying to know your thoughts on this. Do you believe any author can be a public speaker, an effective public speaker? Why or why not?
Yes, I think that any person, any writer who wants to be a public speaker can. I think that the key is understanding what your goals are, and then understanding what is going to work best for you. And so a really easy example here is, you were saying earlier, many writers are introverts, and the idea of standing on a stage in front of hundreds of people in a hotel conference room is terrifying. And so maybe don't make that be your first opportunity that you pursue. Something like this, like I can ignore the comments that are going on at the side, and I can just say, oh, this is just a nice chat with my friend Jim. And that's very easy. Like, how hard can that be? And it's sort of a delicate balance to walk, because you have to both say, oh, it's just me and Jim chatting, like nobody else is out there, and at the same time bring a level of professionalism that reflects that, yes, probably over time, hundreds, if not thousands of people are going to see this conversation. So if the idea of being up in front of an audience is difficult, then pick an audience that's invisible. If talking about a huge topic like, independent publishing is intimidating, then find a topic that's more specific, that feels more comfortable for you to start out with. So I just think it's important to align what you do with your goals, and then align the approach you take with what's possible and comfortable for you to do.
That's a really good point. Do you recommend, you kind of said this already, but do you recommend that it's best for authors who are just getting their feet wet to maybe take baby steps? Or would you recommend just kind of, if they have an opportunity in front of them, just diving right into it and going for it? It's not always easy to take those baby steps. And then sometimes, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I bet you have. When I started, there weren't that many webinars that existed, but I got my start doing physical events in front of people. And then when I started doing webinars, it was really weird, because I hadn't realized that I counted on the body language and the expression of my audience. So when I started doing webinars, it was weird. Like it was really hard to adjust at first. So
there are a couple of things there. One is the difference between virtual and in-person events. And so virtual events, like conversations, like podcast interviews, or this kind of scenario, can be more comfortable for the reasons that we talked about earlier. There are just some ways that a person's goal is going to suggest either in-person or virtual events. So if you have a goal of travel, then virtual events is not what you want to be pursuing. If you want to travel the world, then you want to be looking for opportunities in those areas where you want to travel. If you have a family at home and getting away from home for a trip to Australia is not in the cards for you, then you shouldn't be pursuing opportunities in Australia. You should be focusing on virtual events. And I think for either of those, a huge benefit of the in-person events is exactly what you're saying, that as you're talking, you can look out in the audience and you can see if people are confused or leaning forward or checking their phones or clapping or whatever their response is. And that can be hugely informative. You can kind of make up that deficit a little bit in virtual events, especially if you have somebody like Lexi who's conveniently there monitoring chat for us. And if we really went off the rails, I trust that Lexi could drop a note in the private chat and say, hey, you guys, you're supposed to be talking about such and such a topic, or, did you know that Jim's dog is wandering around in the back of the picture? That might be.
They'll just say it publicly in the comments. They'll say, come back to reality here, Jim.
Yeah, so there are ways to get. Oh, see, look, it just happened. He just walked. She heard me talking about her.
She did.
Uh, but so I wouldn't, going back to part of your original question, which was how should people start out? Um,
Sure.
Virtual events is an easy way, but also look for opportunities like in your local writers group. Like a lot of local writers
Yes.
groups are looking for people who can speak about a topic. I know my local writers group, the Brandywine Valley Writers Group, often has invited guests, and they have like an introductory 5 minutes where it's sort of a rotating schedule, and
Hmm.
authors can sign up to talk for 5 minutes about their books, or whatever they want to talk about for 5 minutes. That can be a super cool and easy way to just practice getting up in front of people and sharing information you have.
Yeah, especially with a supportive group like that, I would
Yeah,
imagine. Toastmasters, have you ever done Toastmasters? Toastmasters has
I
helped
have
me out
not, but
at the very
yeah,
beginning.
I've had a lot of people recommend that as a great opportunity.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, nervousness, public speaking can be so terrifying. What's the antidote, Maddie? What do you feel is the antidote? What has worked for you, and why is public speaking such a terrifying endeavor for so many people?
Well, you are really putting yourself out there. Um, if you are being a speaker, and by
Yep.
definition the focus is on you, that is
Hmm.
just not a comfortable situation for some people.
Yeah.
But if you take all the steps that a professional speaker would, and this is a theme that Michael and I come back to all the time in the book, the importance of
Yes.
professionalism in any aspect of your author career, but especially if you're going to be up in front of people, acting the professional, being the professional, and the things that that entails, like preparation. It can
What?
be,
I
and
can't just
you
sing
can imagine
it.
that can be key to making you feel comfortable. I mean, if you've been able to give your presentation to yourself in the mirror without having your nose buried in your notes, that's going to make you feel better when you stand up on stage. If you've been able to give it to a person who is much like your target audience as you can find, that's going to give you comfort when you get up on the stage. Even things like if you're doing an in-person event and you can get into the room and you can stand on the stage, like maybe when everybody else is at dinner, or just understanding the space you're going to be in can make you feel more comfortable. It can also have the benefit of letting you see some things maybe you need to adjust. I know one
Yeah.
of my um, almost requirements is that I have a lectern to put my notes on. I'm not necessarily going to stand behind the lectern, but I need somewhere to put my notes down. And then
Yep.
that also gives me a place to put my glass of water, and I can walk over. If I just like want to take a moment, take a beat, I can just stop and take a drink of water. If I show up and there's no lectern, if I do that 5 minutes before the presentation is going to start, I'm kind of out of luck. If I'm at a
Yep.
conference and I could do it the day before and I see there's not a lectern, and I can ask the organizers if a lectern can be provided, then I'm good to go. That's checking one thing off my nervousness making list. And so preparation, practice, just experience, and also recognizing that you're probably never going to get to the point where you just stroll onto stage in front of hundreds of people and it's just like walking down the driveway to your mailbox. Like, you're always going to have butterflies, and that's
Yeah.
not necessarily a bad thing, but you just don't want them to be debilitating.
Yeah, I think the butterflies are a blessing in disguise because that's what's going to push you to give the best presentation that you possibly can.
Yeah,
And there's no shortage of preparation. Preparation is everything. Because if you really, really get down to it and you ask yourself, why am I nervous about this? What is it? What's at the core of this anxiety? I think it always boils down to, well, I'm afraid I'm going to get up there and I'm just going to blank out. And so
yeah,
you prepare those slides, go through that presentation, and then, as Maddie was saying, speak through them, talk through them, because you don't know how it's going to sound until you get it out of your mouth. Like, you'll be surprised um, how many times you go through your presentation and you figure out just by speaking the words that, oh, this is a total tongue twister. I had no idea, and you trip over it, and you trip over it, and you trip over it, and then finally you just change it. But you can also practice your pauses. You can practice your inflections when you really want to point to stand out. I always stand up in my room and talk through my presentations, and when I'm going through my slide, and I do it again and again and again and again. um, and But the more you do that, even if it drives you nuts, you can just feel that anxiety coming down. And I don't know about you, Maddie, but I try to get to the point where, um, if I'm presenting a slide deck, and I almost always do, I try to get to the point where when I go on a walk with a dog or, go on a bike ride or whatever, that I can go through that slide deck and almost visualize every single one. And if I can get through that whole thing without having it in front of me, then I know I'm ready. It really
Yeah,
adds to that confidence.
that's a fabulous point to get to. And there are even variations of that where, like, I think it's common knowledge that you don't want to have slides that are packed with text. You don't want to have a presentation that basically requires the people in the audience to read it, because guess what? They could do that if you just sent them the slides, and they wouldn't need you to give the talk. And so they're there to hear you talk about it.
Yeah.
And having slides is fine because it is a good sort of checkpoint for you and a checkpoint for the audience. They're sitting there and saying, oh, I see, the speaker's going to be talking about these 4 things in the next couple of minutes. And then I think having those sets of things in your mind is great, not only because it helps you be prepared for that presentation, but you sort of start developing modules of information. And I'm really finding this now. I'm putting together a kind of a master slide deck for the Alliance of Independent Authors. And there are modules of information. So like there's a set of information that I want to share about the benefits of being a member of Ally. There's a set of pieces of information about the benefits of being an org member. There's a set of slides about the benefits of Indy. There's a set of slides about pros and cons of trad versus Indy. And so each of those is like, if somebody woke me up in the middle of the night and said, tell me the pros and cons of trad versus Indy, I could do that. And I can run through that, 5-10 minutes of information with no trouble. Then I can take a beat. I can say, oh, in this particular circumstance, the next module of stuff I want to present is the benefits of being a member of Ally, or whatever it might be. And if you can think of those things as modules, it not only helps you prepare for that one particular presentation, but then you can start like shifting and regrouping them. You say, oh, for this audience, and you're there to serve the audience, just as you very rightly pointed out, this module of information doesn't make sense, but this one does. And so it's just something to evolve toward, that when you have those modules together, it can make your life as a speaker much easier.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning about how authors have an advantage almost because you're used to storytelling, but you're also used to organizing your ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to bring up a quick comment, another comment from Beth, who asked, a question rather from Beth, who asked, does speaking on podcasts grow your authority?
Yes, absolutely. I think that guesting on podcasts is one of the best ways, not only to start out your author career, but also, just as you're saying, to establish your authority. There's nothing better if you're talking on a particular topic, whether that's a nonfiction topic or something related to some other book genre, to be able to point people to a page on your website that has all your podcast appearances on that topic and say,
perfect. Yeah.
Look, I've illustrated over and over again that people trusted me enough in order to invite me onto their platform in order to talk about this. And you're gaining that sort of mutual, what do I want to say, the social cred that the host brings. If they've extended themselves to invite you onto their platform as a guest, you're benefiting from that trust that they're putting in you, and you owe it to them to pay it back with a good performance. So yeah, I think podcast guest opportunities are a great way to grow authority.
Perfect. Wanted to bring up another question here. This one kind of leads into, acts as a good segue to like, how do you go about getting speaking opportunities in the first place? So Stephen asked, and thanks for your question here, Stephen. Stephen asked, what do you think about using a PR team? I was hit up by one yesterday. Is it worth it? And Stephen, I'm going to assume that you mean for speaking opportunities, because some PR agencies will help authors and other professionals with speaking opportunities. But maybe you're talking about just publicity in general. But let's assume that we're talking about speaking opportunities.
Yes, I can definitely address that question. And I'm going to bring to it the perspective of a podcast host, but I think that you could generalize this answer to event organizers as well, event organizers who are looking for speakers in other platforms other than podcasts. But I think that it kind of boils down to, if you have more money than time, then a PR team might be worth looking into. If you have more time than money, then a DIY approach is better. But that aside, I do think that there's a real benefit, especially early in an author speaking career, where it really behooves you to go after these opportunities yourself. And the pool of opportunities you want to pursue are probably not going to be that hard to find, because you can pursue the platforms that you yourself are a consumer of content of. So I love watching the videos from Draft to Digital. So, that was an easy one to put on my list for a platform that I wanted to pursue. The podcast that I listen to, Mark LaFay's Dark Reflections, the platforms I follow, like Michael's Author Level Up YouTube channel, those are all ones that I know, I understand, and I could go after, those of them that have guests. I'll also list like a DLL Roberts podcast. These are all ones that I know, so they're easy for me to pursue. And the benefit of doing it yourself, rather than relying on another person or team to do it, is that the person you're pitching gets a much better idea of who you are and whether you're going to be a good match, not only based on your expertise, but just based on your personality, based on what your pitch letter sounds like. I have almost stopped accepting pitches from PR firms for the Indy Author podcast, because if I were going to rate the success of all my episodes as a group between self-pitched or pitched by a PR, the ones that were self-pitched are always going to be better. I just know what to expect. I'm not going to be surprised by someone like suddenly turning it into an infomercial. And so I think that involvement of a PR firm is something you work toward rather than something that you start out with, would be my recommendation.
Okay, I like that answer. That's a good answer, because if you do it yourself, if you jump in and just start learning how the whole system works, it's educational.
Yeah, for sure.
I wanted to bring up a quick comment here from Heather. And Heather, I'm sorry I didn't get to this earlier when we were talking about just practicing, but I think this comment is worth sharing with everybody else. Heather says, it helped me immensely with thinking that I would just be talking with some friends when I first spoke on a panel. Not that I wasn't still nervous.
Yeah, well, that's a great point, that panels, I mean, when people think about being a speaker, I think a lot of people think about, I'm in that hotel conference room standing up in front of a bunch of people with my PowerPoint presentation. But panels are another great opportunity. We actually cover some of these, not the usual suspects, in From Page to Platform, panels being one of them. And panels is another great way to get into speaking. As Heather's saying, it is more like you do feel like you're just sitting down talking with some friends, especially if it's a well-moderated panel. Oftentimes, writers' conferences, if you are applying as an attendee, they may ask you if you're interested in placement on a panel, which is an easy entree. You're sharing the spotlight with other people. And so let's say you're on a panel that lasts an hour, but you're on there with, 5 other writers, then maybe you're only on the hook for like 10 minutes of good content. But you do have to remember that you are on the hook for 10 minutes of good content, because no one wins the Panelist of the Year award by saying, yeah, what she said, or yeah, what he said. No, you're there to provide value for the audience. I think, Jim, what you said there at the beginning about that thought of what value am I bringing to the audience is maybe the most important underlying question to ask. But yeah, panels is a great opportunity.
Yeah, and I would also add to that point that if you have the opportunity, try to mix it up a little bit. What I mean by that is, if you have the opportunity to do some panels, say yes to those, as well as the opportunity to do some workshops, say yes to those too. Because if you get too comfortable with doing a workshop, you control your information, you control your content, you have access to all your slides if you're going to present with slides. And then the first time you get asked to a panel, all of a sudden you're like, well, wait a second, this is different. I don't know what to expect. That audience
the Wild
can ask
West.
me anything. Like, oh my gosh. So try to mix it up a little bit as you're kind of coming up to speed. And then if you do get invited to participate on a panel, which can be a lot of fun, just make sure that you're in touch with the moderator, because not every moderator is going to reach out to organize their panel. We wish that they all would, but that's not always the case. So, reach out to the conference director or to the person who is moderating your panel ahead of time, just to figure out, ask them if they have any questions for you in advance, to get a feel for, how you should prepare for the panel.
Yeah.
That'll alleviate some of the anxiety leading up to it. In your experience, Matty, should authors always have slides? Should they never have slides? Does it just depend on the kind of talk that they're doing? What do you think?
I think it does depend on the kind of talk you're giving. There are some expectations that people bring. For example, if you're
Mm-hmm.
doing a keynote, most keynotes probably don't have slides, but I think that in general, there's more of an expectation that that a speaker is going to be perhaps relying more on notes than they would if they had a PowerPoint presentation, as an example.
Sure.
If your presentation is such that having visuals to illustrate things, a pie chart or whatever it is, then that's certainly good. It's certainly better to have a visual of that kind of thing than to just try to describe it to the audience. I think that the trick is to always make sure that you're never using either the slides or your notes as a script, and
Mm-hmm.
never be speaking to the slides. So, it's both annoying and problematic if a speaker is standing on a stage with a slide projecting behind them and they've turned their back to the audience in order to read off the slide. This is where your tip about being
Yeah.
able to give the presentation while you're on a walk with your dog without a slide in front of you is great, because you should be able to just turn around, glance at the slides, and then turn back to your audience and address your audience. So I think that sort of the graduate level of presentation is maybe you don't have slides at all, and you take on that responsibility of having all eyes on you the whole time and feeling
Yeah.
comfortable that you can in fact hold people's attention in that way. I think that I'm always going to want just that prompt, just that, slide with the 4 bullets on it so that I can glance at it. And I also think that the benefit of slides is you can bring additional value or additional sort of atmosphere setting, or however you want to say it, by how you design your slides. So
Yeah.
you can design a slide so that you're conveying more of an optimistic, upbeat tone, or you could design your slide to be more like ominous, like let's say you're doing a talk on crime fiction or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You can use the slides as a visual prompt for what the experience that you want your audience to be having. So no really yes or no answer to that. It just very dependent on the circumstances and what you want to achieve.
Okay. Let me ask you a two-pronged question here. What is the enemy of a good talk? And on the flip side of that, what brings the magic pixie dust where people walk out of the room remembering you and your topic?
Well, I think that a lot of this is going to go back to the extent that you're serving the needs of your audience.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go into a presentation with your stump speech, you just have your standard presentation and you haven't bothered to learn about your audience and understand to what extent it's right for them. That's kind of a recipe for disaster. People who don't provide the opportunity to engage with the audience.
Yes.
A lot of times this is in a Q&A, but not always, setting the expectation with the audience ahead of time about how do you want to engage with them. But even if you decide that you don't want to be taking questions until the end, let's say for some logistical reason,
Mm-hmm.
then speaking to the audience, making eye contact with different audience members, and not just one audience member, because I have been what evidently was the one friendly face in an audience, and I had a presenter like zero in on me, and for 45 minutes they were giving the presentation to
Yeah.
me. It was very uncomfortable as an audience member. And so speak to the audience as a whole.
Yeah.
That would be a tip that would be some of the pixie dust. Making
Yeah.
those adjustments. So again, if we go back to if you're just up there giving your standard speech and you're going to give it hell or high water, and
Yeah.
you're not seeing and reacting to how the audience is responding to it, that's not good. Being able to say, oh, people are looking perplexed, or people are leaning forward, then that's the pixie dust. That's saying, you're understanding your audience and you're serving their needs. And I think that although this is sort of like author, speaker, graduate stuff also, but
Yeah.
being able to handle heckling gracefully is I think also pixie dust. Like people who see a speaker handling heckling gracefully are going to it's almost what I think, like LL Bean or someone said, that the benefit of the happy side of an unhappy customer is being able to do something that turns them into a happy customer, and having them then spread the word about that is kind of the same for
Mm.
the speaker who's handling hecklers. And that is uh, not letting it become a personal thing,
Yeah.
responding to the content of what they say and not the tone of what they say. Um, Starting with a response to that question, but then shifting your attention to the entire audience so it doesn't become just it doesn't stay a conversation between you and that one person, which
Excellent point. Yeah.
is not serving the needs of the audience as a whole. And then having things in your back pocket, like if like at some point, if you can't deal with it that way, just have in your back pocket to say, I don't think we're going to be able to resolve this here, but I'd be happy to speak with you after the presentation, or
Yeah. Take it in
having
the
some
hallway and
take it in the hallway or something like that. So yeah, I think understanding your audience and then nurturing the relationship that you want to form with them is the pixie dust of giving a good presentation.
yeah, very good. Very good. A single word that kept coming up in the book that you and Michael repeated over and over was the idea of authenticity, of being authentic, being your true self when you
Mhm.
deliver these presentations. Um, I've seen speakers, maybe you both have as well, who they're so charismatic, they're full of charm and wit, and they can do these things in their sleep, but then it's obvious that they weren't prepared. Like they're relying on that experience and that wit and that charm to get through. And as somebody who's done this a few times, you can kind of see it. Like, oh, wait, you know what? They're not really prepared for the talk that they're here to deliver. Versus the person who is obviously nervous, but is dripping with sincerity. I would much rather attend that talk for that person who really, really, truly wants to help the audience.
Yeah, I think once again, it's coming back to serving your audience, not serving yourself. And I
Yes.
also think that there's an aspect of that is um, adjust the advice we give as needed to make it authentic to yourself. So a really superficial example is we have a whole chapter on best practices for clothing selection for for presentation. So like one of my offerings, I think, was wear dark colors because they won't show perspiration stains if you're nervous. I know that's a tip from Mark Lefebvre too. He wears a jacket for the same reason. He wears a jacket too, and he said this in public, so I'm not giving anything away.
Secrets
He wears it,
out, Mark.
yeah, secrets out. And so we, and certain colors, or will suggest certain, more authoritative or more casual or more whatever. But at the end of that chapter, I think we say, but if this makes you uncomfortable, like if you're reading that, oh, I should be wearing purple, but I don't like purple, then don't wear
Yeah.
purple, because being comfortable in front of people is just as important as sort of complying with some of these general guidelines. And I think that all gets to authenticity. Everybody doesn't have to be a comedian. Everybody doesn't have to be the voice of authority in that sort of strident way that some people have. But find a way to make your style work for you in serving your audience.
Yeah, very other more great comments. I've learned, like, never drink carbonated water on stage. Never have for, you just don't want to. Never have like a salad at lunch with nuts in it, because the little tiny little skins of like almonds or walnuts even can get caught in your throat later when you least expect it, while you're in the middle
Oh,
of your
interesting.
presentation.
I
Little
didn't
things
know
like that.
about that. We may have to add that.
Happens to me. I don't maybe nobody else, but I've noticed that. Don't eat nuts. Don't eat nuts before a presentation.
Well, I have very unsteady hands, and so I never have a drink near a microphone that has ice cubes in it,
Oh.
because I don't want to pick up a glass full of ice cubes near the microphone and have it go. Yeah.
You just
So yeah,
learn these things.
Yeah, you find
You
those things out, sometimes through having a bad experience, sometimes just by reading a book so that you don't have to have the bad experience.
Yeah, I mean, you have to do it. You have to, what's
Yeah.
the saying? You have to embrace the suck. You just realize it might be uncomfortable at first. Try to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and just do it. Try to just do it. And with that doing it, I'm curious if you and Michael, do you guys have a recommendation on how often, when someone just starts out public speaking, do you recommend, like, try to do it once a month or at least once a quarter or a couple times a year or more frequently? Have you ever thought about that?
I I think it really depends on the goal, and Michael, feel free to add comments in the comments with your perspective on all these questions.
Mhm.
But I think that first of all, it's not the kind of thing you can just choose to do. And so it's more a question of how much are you pitching? And then are
Yeah,
your pitches getting good responses? And if they're not, what do you need to change up in order to get good responses? I think for a lot of people who are still juggling a day job with their author career, then that kind of meters how much you can do, like how much time you can spend on it. Um, if you if you can speak frequently, then that's both good in terms of giving you practice, but it's also good in terms of, establishing that authority that we talked about earlier. If
yeah,
people see a whole press of events about being an author speaker and from me or Michael, then that will help bolster our position as authorities on this topic. So I think it's more doing your best to refine your approach for your pitches so that you are getting those offers and then making the most of them. I mean, I think that that is another very
yes,
underutilized approach that people go to all the trouble. They do the research, they write their pitch letter, they personalize it for the platform, they send it off. If they get a yes, they do all the coordination that's needed to with the organizer or the host or whoever that might be. They prep, they go on
yeah,
there, they learn the technical platform, they do the thing, and then they're like, "Phew, well, glad that's over." And if you do that, you're really shooting yourself in the foot. You're really losing a huge portion of um, the benefit that you and your host can get out of it. And I think back to all the um, people that I have hosted. Again, if I'm thinking of me as a podcast host as being kind of like
hmm,
an event organizer, I think of all the people that I've hosted on the podcast. I think of all the people whose events I've attended or whose podcasts I've guested on and the relationships I've developed with them. Michael being one of them, Mark LaFave being another of them,
hmm.
the opportunities that opened up for me and for them. Um, so don't don't jump off one presentation and go right on to try to next one. Really plumb the depths of what you've already done in order to get the most out of it and to offer the most from it.
Excellent, excellent feedback. I'm going to bring up a quick comment here from
Mhm.
Tom, who I think it's a really important comment. Thanks for this comment, Tom. Tom says, I have a warning to new authors. Some podcasts will attempt to have you pay to play rather than inviting you as a guest to talk about your work. One asked me for $1,000 to do a 45-minute talk. I would
Yeah,
also say that
that's not
we
good.
see that coming from some conferences as well. Like, hey, come to this conference and deliver a talk, and but you have to do the sponsorship as part of that, and then we'll give you the platform.
Yeah, Tom, that is an excellent point, and there's I'm sure there are exceptions to this, but let's just say that in 99% of the cases, uh, a podcast host should never ask a podcast guest for payment, and a
Yeah.
podcast guest should never expect to be paid for a podcast appearance unless you're a huge celebrity. I mean, I have interviewed people for my podcast who command thousands, in some cases, tens of thousands of dollars as speakers at conferences, and I have never had one of them ask me for a payment or any kind of
Mm,
mutual financial benefit one way or the other. I think for conferences, there are certainly conferences where if you are a sponsor, and these are
mhm.
reputable conferences, if you are a sponsor, you may have an opportunity to talk. That's kind of a different thing. This should not be this should not be you having to pay for these opportunities. And in fact, you should be getting money for these opportunities. One of the
Perfect
benefits of,
segue. I was going to ask you that
yeah,
next. Like, how do you go about, if you want to get paid for your speaking, then how do you go about doing that in the first place?
yeah. Well, I think in my own experience, I'm going to speak from my own experience just because that's
Okay.
the only thing I have
Sure.
financial insight into. I did a lot of presentations for free because at first, because I wanted to learn the ropes. I wanted
Of
to
course.
polish my presentation. A lot of these were for writers groups. I did a lot of presentations for writers groups and for libraries.
Yeah.
And then I started finding those opportunities that did pay. And they are oftentimes at larger conferences. Larger conferences often have more of a budget to pay their speakers. Sometimes it
Yeah.
isn't entirely clear on their websites whether they pay or not. If you wonder, and that's a criteria, it has become a criteria for me. I generally don't do presentations anymore unless I'm getting paid, with some specific exceptions.
Hmm.
But if you're not sure and that's a deciding factor for you, ask them. Of course, the question of what can I expect to get paid is always a popular question and very, very difficult to answer. It varies between, like, I just did a series of presentations for a local library. For the first one, I had to drive, 10 miles to the library with my laptop. For the second two, it was virtual. So all I had to do was go to my home office. So I was willing to accept less for those than if I'm going to, like, New York to give a presentation, in which case
Hmm.
it's more of a time investment for me. I think it's fair to ask more. Also keep in mind that the benefits you're getting are not just the payment or the honorarium you get for your talk, but you have to
Yeah.
factor things in like travel and
Sure.
travel expense, accommodations. Like, I just accepted a speaking engagement in New York City where the compensation was that I got a free ticket to a conference, and I'm paying my own way, but it's like a cheap train ticket, and
Yeah.
I'm paying the hotel, which is not as bad as it could be because there's like an event special on the room.
Hmm.
And I thought about that and I thought, yeah, this is something I'm willing to do because this is a conference that I would really like to go to. It's saving me
Yeah.
hundreds of dollars on that front.
Hmm.
I'm getting other benefits like visibility in front of a group of
Yeah.
people that I would not otherwise get. And so lots and lots of financial factors to consider
Sure.
depending on what your goals are.
Yeah. But don't be afraid to ask, because conference
Yeah.
directors they're used to fielding those questions.
Yeah.
Gosh, we've already come up to time, so I want to remind everybody that the book we base this conversation off of is called From Page to Platform: How to Succeed as an Author Speaker. It's excellent. I've gone through it probably a couple times now, and it's for sale at the Smashwords end of year sale going on right
Yay.
now. Yay! You got it for 50% off, so it's like $5. It's almost a no brainer.
It is.
So
It's a no brainer.
so check it out, you guys. And if you want to connect with Maddie, you can do so very easily simply by going to the Indy Author. That's TheIndyAuthor.com, theindyauthor.com. And then from there, you can just not only see what she's up to, but you can connect to her other social accounts: Facebook, Instagram, you name it. She's there. She's
And I also
everywhere.
just
You're
want
everywhere.
to throw out the
Please.
suggestion that please also check out my co-author Michael Aron's platform, Author Level Up. Michael is all over YouTube, so Author Level Up on YouTube, but also authorlevelup.com.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then for all of you here who are watching, thanks again for joining us week in, week out, like you always do. We really appreciate that. If you can comment and subscribe to the channel, we appreciate that too, because then we get to go out there and ask guests like Michael Laron and Maddie to come on the show and share their advice and expertise with all of you. And if you bookmark dddlive.com, then you'll know what the next topic and who our next guest is going to be in subsequent weeks. And finally, if you're visiting us for the first time, first of all, thank you very much for spending your time with us. If you're just investigating self-publishing, why not sign up for a free account at Draft to Digital? There's no risk. Just go to draft, the numeral 2, digital.com. That's draft to digital.com. Once again, everybody, thank you so very, very much for joining us here today. We really appreciate your time. We know you've got other things to do, so thank you for being here with us. Matty, thank you for spending your time with us. I'm so happy to see you again and spend some time with you, chatting with you.
Yeah, it's been so fun. Thank you, Jim.
Until next week, everybody, may you all have a wonderful, wonderful holiday. Enjoy, put your feet up, relax, do your thing, and we will see you all here next week. We have a recorded episode, a pre-recorded episode, where the women of Drafted D, some of them anyway, are talking about romance tropes. It should be a lot of fun. I haven't seen it yet. It's pre-recorded. Check it out. We'll be in the comments. Some of us will be in the comments next week. Until next time, bye, everybody, and happy holidays.
Bye-bye.
Ebooks are great, but there's just something about having your words in print. Something you can hold in your hands, put on a shelf, sign for a reader. That's why we created D2D Print, a print-on-demand service that was built for you. We have free, beautiful templates to give your book a pro look, and we can even convert your ebook cover into a full wraparound cover for print. So many options for you and your books. And you can get started right now at drafteddigital.com.